Good morning, good morning, good morning. Just a couple of brief announcements for you guys. First of all, the challenge for this month in our evangelism temperature is to get to know our neighbors. So we have these handouts in the back. I started filling mine out. I knew 5 houses. I'm missing 3, so you guys can keep me accountable. Hopefully, I'll know those by the end of next week. Second thing is we're starting one more building our fundraising campaign to burn the mortgage. So we have these little handouts in the back. We are hoping to raise $5,000 so we can pay off the mortgage. We are doing well financially. We're on track to pay off the mortgage, but the problem is come November, if we pay off the mortgage like we're supposed to, we will go down to 0 in the bank account, which is still great. We can pay it off and we'll be fine. But we would like to do a little better than fine. I think God has been blessing our church in many, many ways, and we would like to have just a little bit in savings so we can continue to gain on that momentum. So what we're hoping to do in these next couple months is raise $5,000. So in the minute we get that $5,000, we will probably pay off the mortgage. It'll be really great, and then I'll make copies of the mortgage, and I'll let you guys tear them up in service, and we'll throw confetti at each other, and it'll just be a fantastic time in church. I'll even bring donuts. It's going to be a great day, guys. And we probably will do a fire. I'll probably burn one up here like the old sacrifices of the Old Testament. It's going to be great. This is what we're going to do. But we need just a little bit more so that we cannot go to 0. We would like to have just a little bit of a buffer in our savings. So just with that, we have these little handouts in the back. Please grab one if you feel so inclined. If you would like to pay to that specific fund, write on your check or your memo, burn the mortgage. If you go online, you have a little, you have 2 options online that will say just general tithes and offerings, and the other one will be burn the mortgage. So please help us in that effort. With that, I'll invite Bill to come over, pray over our church, and then we'll collect the offering.
so much, Lord. It's been a blessing. Lord, as you know, we're wanting to take care of this mortgage, and Lord, you can do the impossible. Help us to accomplish everything, Lord. Through you, all things are possible. Be with us, Lord, in this offering. Use it as you see fit. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen. At this time, the kids are dismissed to go downstairs. In keeping with this year's vision for our church, which is to go, we talked about that 2 weeks ago, the state of the church. We prayed as a board, I would say, and as the leadership that it's been given to me, that we are called to go out, like the Great Commission says, go and make disciples. So last week was the beginning of essentially our new church year, and we started with a sermon series on evangelism called Go and Tell. Now, for most of us, evangelism will not be standing on street corners, right? Most of us, evangelism will not be proselytizing and yelling out and handing pamphlets. No, for most of us, evangelism should look like everyday evangelism, using our everyday, ordinary life as a testimony to those who we are connected with and those we know. What we said last week is evangelism like this is everyday evangelism that takes the everyday, ordinary life as a testimony, will need to be fueled by compassion for our lost neighbors. And if we have compassion for our lost neighbors, we will find that we are actually called to come out of isolation and to, again, see the people who live closest to us as not as nuisances or tool stealers or latchkey children or bad influences, but as people that we are actually called to love and to cherish and to share the gospel with. The people that we interact with the most. In an effort to do this, we looked at Jesus' life and said that his full ministry was fueled by compassion in itself. Now, today, and what we challenged you guys last week is to start filling out your neighbors' names. One of the basic things we can do is learn somebody's name. Half the reason you don't have a conversation with people nowadays is because you've forgotten the name and you don't want to be embarrassed by it. You're like, oh, I don't remember the name. I can't talk to them, right? So we challenge you, get to know your neighbors' names. Now, today we're going to talk about the role of conversation in personal evangelism. So I wanted to begin just with a question. Are you good at conversations? Think about it. Are you good at conversations? I want to ask you to prove it. Okay. With the person beside you, I want to put up one picture. And I want to challenge you to have a conversation with somebody near you. There's pretty much close enough. You can do this. About anything on this picture. Go. You got 2 minutes. Have a conversation. See if you can. If nobody's by you, you can talk to yourself. Have a one-way conversation with yourself. It'll be kind of, Ben, that's Marilyn. I don't know if you know Marilyn yet, but you guys could talk to each other. That's pretty good. Could you have a conversation about anything on this picture? Give me another 30 seconds. It's a little tough, isn't it? It's a little tough. I think what I have kind of learned about personal evangelism, or at least when I was trained to evangelize, which I was never fond of, is evangelism often just feels like pickup lines and one-liners, right? Does anybody remember what a pickup line was? Has everybody ever heard a pickup line? Just remember a long, long time ago in a galaxy far away, or what feels like a galaxy far away, when you were young and in love, and you saw the person that your heart just beat for, and you looked them in the eyes, and what did they say to you? Do you remember? Hey, babe, how you doing? Were they smooth? Did it look like they had toe jam out coming out of their mouth because their foot was in their mouth the whole time. What did it look like? I know I wasn't smooth, right? When I was a teenager, there was a proliferation of Christian pickup lines that came out mostly because of Tumblr, and they were called Hey Girls. So, like, since you weren't a teen when I was a teen, I thought it'd be my job to ingratiate you with a few of these things that I had to suffer through, and the women of my time had to suffer through as well. What a Christian pickup line might look like back in the day was, I was reading the book of Numbers, and I discovered yours wasn't in it. Can I have it? Smooth? Smooth, okay. Another Christian pickup line at the time might have been, I think my spiritual giftiness is discernment, because I sense that we would be a good pair. Okay, a little worse, okay. Another Christian pickup line might have been, is your name Faith? Because you are the substance of all I've hoped for. Okay, the question is, would any of these work on you? The truth is, you say no, but the truth is, if you had an inkling of liking towards the other person, it would have. If there was just an inkling of like, right? If you had an inkling of attraction. The truth is, you can say a lot of awkward things to a person you're in a relationship with, or to a person who wants to have a relationship with you, right? If I was to take any little section of your marriage or whatever you have, the relationships, and take that out of context, people would think that's strange. But you can say a lot to somebody who wants to have a relationship with you, or somebody you have a relationship with. And I would go further in saying that part of my problem with evangelism training that I had as a kid was it was the opposite of what I just described. Like, we were trained with Christian pickup lines. I told you about the one I was taught when I was collecting canned goods last week. When I knock on doors and they give me canned goods, and I would say, thank you for the canned goods. Do you know where you're going to go when you die? And they say, no, that's a little jarring. I would be trained to go tell these people to reflect on their mortality and what's after, but they had no desire to have a relationship with me. And I think for 95.65% of people, this doesn't work. There are people who are called to this type of evangelism. That's true. But for most of us, we are Christians who are called to live our everyday, ordinary lives and find ways to talk about the gospel with people. I don't think it has to be awkward, but I think we are convinced it would be awkward. Not to share with even a random stranger, but to share with the people we love the most. We're convinced that if we told our children or our neighbor about the gospel, they're going to think we're weird. We don't think a conversation about sin would fit in. We don't think a conversation about there being one way to God to be appropriate. We're convinced they would be all awkward. We're convinced that they would not work. Yet the truth is that we are called to do it. And that's tough. So we're going to go back to the words of our Savior, Jesus, who is the best evangelist that ever lived in the world. And we're going to look how he turns a conversation about water into sharing the gospel. So you probably know this story pretty well. It's in John 4, and it includes the woman of the well. And what we know in this story is Jesus is returning. He's going to go from Galilee to Judea, which is something like 102 miles. And they did this on foot. That's a lot. It was daunting to even think about. But he had to go through Samaria at the time. And it says that he's probably in his second day of the journey. And it's probably around 12 p.m., where we all kind of want to nap on Sundays, 12 p.m. And he says that he has to stop at the well. Now, we know this. I've said it to you before, but you have to remember that Samaria is a place the Jews hated. The Jews hated the Samaritans. And the fact that Jesus stopped in Samaria, in village of Samaria, would have put his disciples' hair on edge. Like, they would have just been upset the whole time. We have no reason to think that the disciples thought any differently about the Samaritans than the rest of the Jews. It was the disciples, after Jesus was preaching to some Samaritans who rejected him, it was his disciples who said, Lord Jesus, give me the power to call down fire from the heavens and consume them. This is what they want to do to the Samaritans. We have no reason to believe the disciples thought any better about the Samaritans than any other Jew at the time. And I can imagine as Jesus rolls up into this town by this well, and the disciples are just clutching their purse bags really close to them because it's a sketchy area. And they probably have one hand on their dagger, and they probably try to discreetly lock their camel without anybody noticing, right? And then they're like, Jesus, don't stop here, right? This place is dangerous. Let's keep going to the next town, please, Jesus. But Jesus says, no, we got to stop here. So the disciples disperse and go get sandwiches, and they probably do it begrudgingly. And what it says is that Jesus finds a Samaritan woman who came to draw water. And Jesus says to her, "Give me a drink." Now, this is not a common way to start a conversation. I freely give you that, right? Like if I came up to a random woman right now and said, "Give me a drink," I want to get more than I asked for, right? I want to get a kick in the shin and maybe probably an elbow in the stomach, and they're probably going to run away and say, "Who is this creep?" Right? So it's already kind of a strange conversation. And we know it's kind of strange beyond just the asking of a drink in Jesus' time, because back then, men didn't talk to women outside of their family. Right? It was very uncommon for them to talk to any person who wasn't in their family of the opposite sex. People would have suspected nefarious things. They would have thought, man, there's something wrong going on here. And on top of that, she was a Samaritan. But Jesus does this amazing thing. He takes this simple ask of giving me a drink of water, and he's going to turn it into a conversation that he chooses to keep going deeper and deeper to what the gospel says. So the scripture goes on and continues to say this. After he says this, the Samaritan woman said to him, "How is it that you, though you are a Jew, are asking me for a drink, though I am a Samaritan woman?" So we hear that little complexity, right? The Samaritan woman immediately picks up on how different they are. And we get this, right? One of the biggest things that stops us from having conversations with people is how we perceive them as different, right? I look at somebody, I immediately start assessing, are they like me? Do I have any interest? They look scary. They got tattoos up the nines. They have full sleeves and a nose ring. I'm not sure I want to talk to them today. You know, they probably have one of those coexist bumper stickers. I'm not sure these are the people I need to be engaging with. Most of the time, we choose not to engage in a conversation because we perceive differences. And this Samaritan woman is absolutely shocked. He says, "How is it that you, a man who's a Jew, is talking to me, a woman who's a Samaritan?" She's utterly shocked. And what Jesus does is he begins to turn this on its head. Jesus says, "You're shocked about that? Let me tell you why you should be really shocked." He goes on and says this: "If you knew the gift of God and who it is who is saying it to you, 'Give me a drink,' you would have asked him, or he would have given you living water." Everyone, and he later says this after they have a little small conversation about a pail. Everyone who drinks of this water will never be thirsty again, essentially. Now, that's interesting because Jesus knows what's at her heart. We've probably heard the story a million times. You probably have heard pastors say why she's at the well, but we'll refresh our memories. It is very uncommon for a woman to be at the well at 12 p.m. Most of the women would go early in the morning. Why? Because it was less hot. So usually the gaggle of women would go, and they'd socialize, and they would talk, and they would go to the well to draw water for the family, then return upon that time. Now, this woman was not going at that time. And Jesus knows why. And we kind of predict why we think this is. But ultimately, it's because she was avoiding socializing with these people because of her life. Have you ever avoided somebody? Think about like maybe you were in middle school and there was a bully, right? And you chose not to go down that path because you knew they're always sitting there waiting for you, right? Have you ever avoided somebody? Or maybe think about like in the lunchroom or a coworker that just talks bad about you all the time and you just kind of avoid eye contact with them, right? Have you ever avoided somebody? Maybe like you honked at somebody because they cut you off in traffic and then they're beside you and they slow down to make eye contact with you. That would change how you drive, right? That'd make you take an exit a little earlier, wouldn't it? You ever tried to avoid somebody? This lady is actively avoiding the other women of her town because she has been living a life of sin, and she wanted to avoid the whispers and the talking and the rumors and all their judgment that they had cast upon her. And because of this, her life was changed dramatically. Every day she engaged in a new ritual just to avoid these people. Every day she would go in the hot of the day, suffer the sun, just to bring water back to presumably her family. And I think you can see that Jesus is offering her something that she's desperate for, because he says, if you will listen to me, there is a drink that I can give you that will give you, that you will never have to drink of again. And I think she's so desperate. This is something so true to her heart that she's so desperate that she takes him literally in the moment. Anybody else would probably thought, he's talking about something different right here. This must be a metaphor. He's doing something crafty right now, but she is so desperate for a change in her circumstance that she takes him literally and says, tell me what this drink is. This is what it reads. Sir, give me this water so that I will not be thirsty, nor come all the way here to draw water. She is desperate for the solution. She wants to get out of this ostracization, the social persecution, being removed from her community. She wants a way out. And what happens is Jesus doesn't correct her. And I think that's awesome, because a lot of times we correct people in conversations. No, you don't get it. Silly woman. No, you're not understanding what I'm laying down right now, right? You're a little bit confused. Let me show you the way. No, Jesus doesn't do that. Jesus instead chooses to go even deeper into the conversation. He chooses to take another dive into her life. And he replies to her, bring back your husband. And what does she say? I don't have a husband. And Jesus says, you're right. You don't have a husband, and the person you're living with is not your husband. And matter of fact, you've had 5 husbands. And can you imagine just for a second that you're in that person's shoes? Like having a sit-down conversation with somebody who knows your sin? Like try this someday. Go to an airport and sit down beside somebody and say, I know that you lied yesterday. And just see how the conversation goes. Just see what happens. I know that you lusted at 5 p.m. on Wednesday. Just see how that conversation goes. It would be awkward, right? That person will leave. That person might hit you. That person might have pepper spray, and your eyes might be crying after that. That would not be a good conversation. Now imagine the inverse. Somebody comes up and sits beside you and says, I know that you stole sprinkles when you were 5 from your babysitter, and you never told anybody. And I know that you broke your brother's bike when you were 10, and you never fessed up to it. And I know you didn't feed your dog for a day because you forgot about it when you were 11. And I know that you did this, which are all sins I've done at some point in my time. I'll freely admit it. But imagine having somebody know that much about your life. That would not be an easy conversation, right? That'd be unnerving. I'd probably get up and leave. I would not stand at the door while somebody was saying, I know all this about you. I would slam it shut. And I think you see this because what the woman does is says, Sir, I perceive that you are a prophet. Our fathers worshipped on this mountain, and yet you Jews say that in Jerusalem is the place that that where one must worship. She almost like diverts the conversation. Have you ever been in a conversation where somebody's kind of got you in the ropes, and then you feel a need to kind of get out of it, so you do something crazy or stupid? No, I do this sometimes in my marriage when we're in arguments, or like think about this kind of red herring, right? So like somebody comes up to you and says, "You're not doing your chores." Have you ever had that conversation? I've had that a couple times. You're not doing your chores, and you say, "Well, you're not coming to have a conversation because your tone is just bad, right? And don't talk to me that way." So in this moment, what you're doing is you're focusing on such a small element of what's going on that you're diverting the real focus of the matter, right? Have you ever tried to wiggle your way out of an argument with your spouse or a loved one by diverting it to a small issue instead of the big issue in front of you? This woman tries to do that with Jesus. Jesus has seen into her heart. He knows what she's been struggling with. He knows her desires. And she says, well, why do you Jews say that we have to worship in Jerusalem? Why are you so mean to us? And Jesus doesn't take the bait. Jesus goes further and he says, no, there's a time where it won't matter where you worship. He continues to say this, but there's a time that even now has arrived when the true worshipers will worship the Father in spirit and truth. For such people, the Father seeks to be his worshipers. God is spirit, and those who worship him must worship in spirit and truth. The woman said to him, I know that Messiah is coming, he who is called Christ. When the one comes, he will declare all things to us. Jesus says to her, I am he, I am the one the one speaking to you. Jesus takes this conversation that started with water, he morphs it into living water, and then he unveils himself to the woman saying, I am the Messiah that you have been hoping for. This is not about where you worship anymore. Actually, I'm offering you the gospel, that I am coming to change and make things new. It's a masterful conversation. And at that time, it says that the disciples come, and they're floored that Jesus is talking to this woman. And the woman's so floored that she leaves her bucket and then she returns to her home and she starts testifying about what she's experienced with Jesus. And she says, come see the man who's told me everything about myself. And what Scripture records is through her personal evangelism, multiple Samaritans then come to Jesus and learn the gospel. Jesus takes this everyday, ordinary conversation, hey, give me some water, to a moment of proclamation of God and what he's doing in this world. So what do we do with this? Because we're not Jesus. It'd be nice if, I had that kind of direct line with God that I could see into the hearts of people. So, but I'm not. So how do we do this? And I think what we can really learn from this passage is that can we find it in ourselves to go deep with people? Jesus continually goes deep in conversations with people that he talks to. I think if we look at the different elements of this conversation, it involves talking to a stranger. It involves talking to somebody who's noticeably different than you. It involves asking an ordinary question. It brings to light personal sin. It shares the gospel. And nowadays, we can't imagine doing almost any of these things with somebody, right? I ain't going to talk to a stranger. I hardly talk to my wife. I ain't going to talk to anybody, right? I don't want to talk to people. And my fear is that we've lost the ability even to conversate with people. I don't know if that's a word, but conversate with people in a meaningful way. I don't ever find, strangely enough, in the gospel that Jesus small talks. And if you find it, show it to me. I try to find one. There's not a single passage of Jesus making small talk with anybody. And I can't prove this. Obviously, this is kind of Trevor's harebrained theory. But I don't think it's a fashionable idea that Jesus even small talked. I can't fathom it. Can you imagine the Jesus who feels so awkward in the presence of a stranger that he has to cut the ice with, man, the weather, it's a little wet out there. Can you imagine Jesus feeling so awkward he had to have that conversation? Can you imagine the Jesus who needs to assess if he's safe in the conversation? So he asks a question about, how was your day? And then he's reading the body language and their tone and seeing if it's a safe person to talk to. Can you imagine the Jesus who feels so obligated to the social pressures and protocol that every time he meets people, he has to say something like, how was your day? Which means he has nothing anymore. Good. How was your day? Good. Means nothing. No, I have a hard time believing that Jesus had meaningful or meaningless interactions with people. I really just do. I can't imagine that. I imagine people came to Jesus and were profoundly changed, and we only get the best parts of that in the gospel. But I just have a hard time personally thinking that Jesus just sat around, chewed the cud, and shot the breeze. Jesus was the divine presence of God. I think you would sense something beside him. Yes, he had friends. I assume they joked. I assume they did have small talk of sorts, but I don't imagine that Jesus did I don't imagine that Jesus often did meaningless things. The Gospels record 9 times that Jesus initiates a conversation with people. Only 9. There's a lot of interactions where Jesus is talking with somebody because somebody made him talk. Sometimes Jesus is addressing another person that's not in the story, but 9 times does Jesus actually initiate a conversation specifically. Most of them are with the disciples. And Jesus doesn't begin those conversations with, "Man, how about that game? Wasn't that great? Look at that camel. That's the best camel I've ever seen." No, that's not how Jesus begins this conversation. No, he begins the conversation with, "Come follow me," right? "Come follow me." The other times is when Jesus sees Zacchaeus, the tax collector, in the tree, and he's trying to see Jesus. Apparently, he's a real short man, and Jesus doesn't, again, engage in small talk and said, "Man, that tree's awesome that you're in. What kind of tree's up there? Is that a fig tree up there? Do the figs taste good?" No. Jesus says, "Come down off that tree. I'm coming to your house." That conversation won't work today. I promise you that one. "Get out of your car. I'm heading to your house right now." That's how you get the cops called on you. Jesus has an interpersonal conversation with a paralyzed man at the pool of Bethesda, where the guy has been paralyzed all his life and sitting there, and Jesus begins to ask around people to figure out his situation. And he says to the man, "Do you want to be healed?" Which is like a no-brainer. Jesus knows everything, but he still knows the person's heart. And he says, "Yeah, I want to be healed, but nobody will help me." Man, that's a deep question. It's not, "How long have you been there?" It's not, "Does it hurt? Can you move your legs, sir?" Like, none of these things are as what he's saying to the man. He says, "Do you want to be healed?" The man says, "Yes." And here we have this story of the Samaritan woman. Jesus chooses to go deep. We have all kinds of stories where the gospel is given from him to others because it's not superficial. And I get it, you know. I think I'm not an evangelist. I already told you I failed when I was a kid at evangelizing. Tucked tail and ran when somebody asked, "No, I don't know," or when somebody told me, I know I don't know where I'm going. Just turn away and hand them the pamphlet, right? But I get the hesitation that we might have here because we don't have as direct line as Jesus did with the Father. Like, if I had such a direct line that Jesus had with the Father, I could say, "Give me the 111 on the redheaded woman, right, with freckles, who's about 5'2" and buck 60. Just tell me what I need to know to evangelize to him, God." And God would say, "Well, talk to her about her kid that just went to the principal's office." And be like, "Yes, that's great, God. How are you doing? How was your day? I see that you're a mother. Do you have kids? How are you feeling about their prosperity right now?" That'd be a much easier way to do this, right? We don't have that direct line. I would argue the Spirit helps us. So I get it. It's intimidating to start a conversation. The other thing, I think there's a class of person that would say, "Well, I'm just not good at conversations," right? I think a lot of people feel that way. "I'm an introvert," or "I'm a man. I don't talk. I'm a gorilla," right? "I don't talk to people," right? And I would say, pop quiz for you. Your kid comes home with an F- on a test. And they come up to you and they see that you're angry and they say something to you like, "Well, I'm just not good at math. I don't have the proclivity for arithmetic." What are you going to say to them? You get the proclivity, find a way to get an A, right? You're not going to accept such an excuse. Yet, I would get it if it was rocket science. But managing social interactions and talking with people is something we all have to do every single day of our life. I don't think God's going to give us that excuse. "Well, I just wasn't good enough to go talk to my neighbor." I don't think that's going to work. No, I think the reason we struggle in America is not because there's outside influences that are dissolving our churches. I think a lot of times people are telling us to point to the culture and say, "All those weirdos out there, they're the reason." No, I think the problem with why the church isn't really growing that fast in America is that we stopped having a spirituality that means anything. It's become privatized, it's been individualized, and it does not break out of any mold of our home. And it hardly even gets in there. I'll hammer this point home. When's the last time you prayed with your kids? Adult, young, when's the last time you prayed with your kids? When's the last time you read the scripture with your wife or your husband or your child? No, we kind of have a spirituality that's been devoid of any external expressions. And we ask why the church isn't growing. Well, the church isn't growing because our Christianity is confined to our mind and our head and never comes out beyond just what we think about in our private, personalized prayers and our private devotion times. That's why the church is struggling. Because we don't have any external proof of our faith. Jesus went around sharing the gospel. Jesus went around turning conversations about water into the living water. And what I think this has to mean for us is that we are called to go deep with people because we're not Jesus. I don't get to read people's heart. And what that means is, like we talked about last week, that we're not called, God did not save us so we could just be a grumpy puss and live our isolated lives, unencumbered by any inconvenience or any inconvenient person. No, Christ came that he had compassion for the sinner and calls us to have compassion for the sinner. And that our ordinary, everyday, average lives should be filled with the same compassion so that when we see the people in our community, meaning our neighborhoods, the places we work, the gym, the places that we go every day, we can touch these people's lives who all need Jesus. And this is going to take effort. And this is going to take building trust and building relationships. So how do we do this? Well, I'd argue, if we're applying this to our life, we need to start praying for people by name. Something changes in you when you pray for somebody by their name. I promise you, I've done this multiple times. You got an enemy, pray for them by name. You have a child, pray for them by name. If you have a neighbor, pray for them by name. It will change your heart in ways that I cannot describe to you. Think about my friend's kid, CJ. And when I started praying for him by name, my heart broke for him constantly. I wanted to know more about him because I prayed for him by name. The second thing I'd say, these are quick points, I'll give you one last one, is that you need to find ways to have conversations with people again. It's tough. We got a phone. I got a YouTube feed where I can just check out of the world. I got Pinterest and Facebook. And I can go the whole day without looking somebody in the eye. Without looking my children in the eye or my spouse or my neighbor. I think God has an opinion about that. I really do. I think that we have to find, again, ways to be neighborly and start conversations with people and talk to them. And maybe that looks like, putting down your phone next time you're going to an appointment and looking at the person beside you. Maybe that looks like when somebody's tinkering on something outside, stopping by and saying, hey, what are you doing? That looks interesting. Maybe when somebody's having some work done in their house, you can go say, hey, the work that was done over there looks good. Who was the person so I can remember that for the next time? Maybe it's as simple as I like that shirt. Where'd you get it? It's kind of cool. I like the brand. Half of my conversations I used to start up with old women was about Vera Bradley purses when I was a teenager. Because my wife had one at the time. I knew what the brand was, so it was an easy inroad just talking to people. My wife has a Vera Bradley purse like that. Isn't that great? And that's a 30-minute conversation right there. Super simple. We need to, again, have conversations with people. But these conversations need to go deep. We have conversations with people so that eventually we can earn the ability to talk about something of substance. There's a story of a person who studied conversations. And he tells the story about a guy his job was prostate cancer, essentially. He was a prostate cancer surgeon. And every day he assumed that people came to his office looking for advice. So these people would come to him and he would give them his standard advice. Prostate cancer is a very, very slow-growing cancer. It rarely goes fast. The joke in that community is you'll probably die before it kills you, right? You'll probably be old and die before it ever comes. So generally, he'd give almost every single one of the people that came into his office the same advice. We're going to watch it. We're going to scan it. We'll do a biopsy every 2 years. And if it changes, then we'll do something. Don't get surgery. And he thought people would be elated. He thought people would just be rejoicing the whole time. I don't need surgery. I don't need radiation. This is fantastic. And they'd leave his office, and the next day they'd come back and say, I want the surgery. And he was baffled by this. What was wrong? He thought, what's wrong with every single one of my patients that they're not listening to me? which is a funny question, right? If something's wrong with everybody, there's actually probably something wrong with you. Then he began to look into this about what he needed to do, and he learned through some courses of study that he needed to ask a better question. So when people began to come into his office, he asked a whole different line of questions. He asked, "What does this cancer mean to you?" And when they began to talk to him, they would begin to talk about, in this one specific case that they cited, this man talked about how he lost his dad at a young age and how hard that was for his mother and himself. And then began to talk about his kids and how he's worried about the world for them and global warming and all these other things. And what he was surprised to find is they did not talk about the diagnosis whatsoever. And what he found was when these people were coming into his office, they were no longer looking for advice. No, they were looking for some kind of help to process what was going on because it was fresh and new. And what the tagline of the person who tells the story is they say essentially, we can always connect more and more profoundly if you want to. But half the issue is the question you're asking. A lot of times we spend time just asking, how's work? How's life? How's the kids? Those questions don't inspire much. You can easily shift a question from how's work to what do you enjoy about work today? That's a personal question. That changes how somebody answers it. You can easily say, change a question from how are your kids to what's the last thing that your kids made you smile? Or what's the last way your kids made you smile? A very small change to the question. A question you might want to know from your spouse, right? We might be a little embarrassed not to know that answer from the people we love, right? The person who told this story challenges people to ask random strangers this, which I would probably never do, but he challenges them to go ask this question. When's the last time you cried? Think you could ask that question? And what he also challenges them to do when they answer that question, because you'll find that people actually are willing to answer this question even to you, because people want to talk, people want to share. He challenges them to share it themselves. When was the last time they cried? What I think, and this is anecdotal, and this last part's definitely not biblical. You're not going to find the art of questions in the Bible. But when we talk about the spiritual practices that I think God calls us all to, we kind of have to use things to construct a way forward. And what I would say to you, if we want to, again, engage people, what brings conversations from give me a drink of water to I am, meaning God, and the living water, we need to, one, start to know people's names. Challenged you guys that last week. I would challenge you this week, start praying for them by name. Start finding ways to have conversations with them regularly. And as you have regular conversations with these people that God has put into your life, who are a stone's throw away from you at all times, I would challenge you to find a way to go deep with them. Because we want to be authentic sharers of the gospel. And if we don't have that equity with them, it's always going to feel unnatural if you're not called to that type of evangelism, which most of us are not. So we need to find a way to go deep with people, build up the equity, ask questions, find a way to interact, and then choose to not be afraid of the bigger questions. What are you struggling with? What breaks your heart? Why do you struggle with the idea of God? Not to be afraid of asking these deeper questions that could inspire a conversation where you could share the gospel. And last, be vulnerable yourself. People won't trust you if you're not vulnerable. If you're not willing to say, yeah, I struggled with sin too. And here's why. People always tell you their victories. And they always exaggerate them. I caught a fish this big. Yeah, this big. Right? But when you're willing to tell people what you struggled with, your faults, your messes, people will trust you more. And then people can see the gospel because they will then see what God has done in your life. Let me conclude with this. Jesus had compassion for the lost. We are called to have compassion for the lost. And that will call us to come out of isolation. And when we come out of isolation, we will find that we need to have conversations with people who are surrounding us at all times. And if we can begin to have those conversations, we can build the equity to begin to ask deeper questions. Questions that have gospel implications. And as we begin to further enmesh into lives, we can have conversations like, let me tell you about Jesus. This is what everyday, interpersonal, average evangelism looks like, something that we are all called to do. I'm not called to stand on a street corner. This is about as excited as I get behind this pulpit. But I am called to look at every one of my neighbors and think, man, they need Jesus. How can I go and tell them about it? So these are just practical guides for that. We are going to move into a time of communion. So I invite, can we have Bill and then Hannah, would you help with the communion as well? When we think about communion, this is Church Nazarene and this is an open communion. So what we say during these services is anybody's welcome to take communion if you profess Christ as your Lord and Savior. But as I think about communion today, I thought about how much of the gospel was shared at the table. We said this 2 weeks ago that there weren't big evangelists at the beginning of the church. There were some apostles and disciples, but the church grew around dining room tables. And Jesus modeled this. When he sat at the table and he said, this is what I'm giving to you, my body and my blood. We are called to model this as well. We are called to invite people in and share the body and the blood with them. So with that, I'd invite you guys to take a posture of worship as we go through this last song, and then we will take the elements.